Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Weekly Pixels. This is episode 3, starring the remainder of our Pixelmon. Here you can see the 9 that I accomplished to making this week. Let's get into the time lapse. Alright, kick-starting our series here, we have Hitmonlee, the fighting type Pokemon. This is the only Pokemon I made this week that I accidentally missed the line art of. So his line art's basically complete, and the majority of the footage here is showing off the shading, which didn't go without issue. The light source I decided to go with was in the top left, and at first the way the light was hitting Hitmonlee's body just did not look right, so I ended up changing it later, and I think it looked a little better. But overall, I thought this would be one of the easier ones to make, but he turned out to be kind of difficult. And I'm still not super happy with how he ended up. I think he's some tweaking colors right now. Here's the original way I did the light source. It doesn't look right. I think I need to have a smaller part of a smaller highlight, and then I add in a shadow at the end here. Yeah, reduce the size of the shadow in the highlight. I think it looks a little better, but here's the finished product. Not too bad. Slight tweaks over the video footage. Alright, here we go. We have our grass-type Pokemon, Executor, the evolved form of Execute. He is a strange kind of palm tree type Pokemon. I started out with just the heads, and then I added the leaves on top of the heads and colored them in with basic colors. Now, as you can see, I'm working on cleaning up the line work to give a less blocky, more smoothed out feel. Now I add his big barrel-shaped body and his big trunk legs attached to it. For this pose, he's just going to be sitting on the ground, just lounging around like you'd probably find him in the wild. Since this guy's pretty symmetrical, it's pretty easy to do the legs. Now for the faces, they're just kind of wacky, kind of happy, for whatever reason faces. So I made them all slightly different, but they're all pretty happy. Adding the last little bit of detailing on the body, legs, and feet. Getting his little talons on his feet. Now for a little bit of shading. And highlights. Not bad, not bad. I ended up lowering down the fern on his head and covering up some of the eggs to give it a little more depth. Turned out pretty good. There's the final product of Executor, our grass-type Pokemon. Next up was a personal favorite of mine. I ended up picking Dragonair for the Dragon-type Pokemon. It's basically a giant snake or a serpent. So the entire thing is all curves. This one took me quite a while compared to the rest of them. A few of the different Pokemon took me about an hour to an hour and a half max. This one was somewhere in the middle of that. I spent a decent amount of time just getting the line work to look smooth and all the rounded transitions. And in the end, it does look pretty good, I think. I'm adding the jewels on its tail. Two-tone body, adding a simple shadow to the underside of it. A little bit of highlights. The feathered earpieces kind of took me a little bit to get right, but overall they turned out well, I think. Tweaking the colors a bit, because I wasn't too happy with them. Shading, adding the highlights on the head and the horn, and that does it for Dragonair. A couple touch-ups. After recording, I realized I missed the jewel on its neck, so I added that in afterwards as well. I think it turned out really well. Next up, we got the wacky flying-type Pokemon, Farfetch'd. I always think this guy's hilarious. He's probably one of my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon just because of how absurd he is. He's basically a duck that carries around a leak. I don't know why, but that's just what he does, I guess. So for this guy, once again, I started out with a sketched line art Once I get the basic line art and composition there, I fill it in with the basic base colors, and then from there I go and edit the line work to be smoother, not blocky, good transitions. And after this week working on Farfetch'd and last week working on Articuno, I've decided that feathered Pokemon can just go away. They're insanely annoying to make. This guy took me the longest out of all of them. I think it was just about an hour and a half. I spent a very long time adjusting his feathers on his wings to look okay, and still it doesn't look that great. Now I'm working on the shading here. Trying to get the light source coherent. Adjusting the shading and the colors, and ended up with a pretty good looking Farfetch'd, as much of a trouble was to make. Next up, we got Marowak, the ground type Pokemon, the evolved form of Cubone. This guy, here's the process of the line art at the beginning. I just used the outline color that I chose, getting the basic shapes in, and then this time I was doing less of a rough sketch and more of like a quick, like detailed sketch, I guess, where I didn't have a whole bunch of messy lines, or if I did, they were relatively clean. And then I went through and adjusted the messy lines to be the way I wanted them to look in the end product before I put any color in. And I think, I'm not sure if this is better or worse, I think it worked really well on this character because it's relatively simple. The only gripe I have about this character is the foot, his right foot and the bone look kind of strange being the way they are. Maybe I should have tilted the bone slightly more and got it out of the way behind the foot, but it turned out okay. Getting the last little bit of detailing on him is on his skull. And then I start with the line work, or I'm done with the line work, and start shading in. He's like super simple to shade. I think I had basically 2 colors for each color. A normal, like, common color, and then the shading, or the shadowed part. And he turned out really clean, super fun to make. Getting his belly shaded now. There you have it, there's Marowak. He turned out pretty badass. Next up is everybody's favorite Pokemon, Mew. Or at least many people's favorite Pokemon. The pose I chose for Mew ended up making it so the line art for the head was really frustrating to get correct for the mouth, just because of the angle that it was tilted at. But it in the end came out alright. I couldn't deal with the eyebrows being on it, so I removed them completely. This guy started out as a blob, which I'm not sure if I like doing the blob form before the line art form. Basic shapes seem to be, I don't know. For certain projects, I understand using basic shapes to get the beginning of your project started is good, but for me it seems to slow me down. Mew was one of the fast ones. It was also a smaller sprite, but it turned out okay. Getting the tail, just a big long tail with a wider end. Got his little belly and his little rabbit feet. Simple shading on this guy. I don't think he had any highlights, just base color and shadows. Here you can see me fighting with the mouth shape again. Finally ended with something that looked okay though. And there's the final product of Mew. Third to last, we have our fire-type Pokemon I chose, which was Ninetales. I've always thought Ninetales and also Arcanine were super badass Pokemon. I decided to go with Ninetales in this one over Arcanine, even though Arcanine's probably, I like Arcanine more, but Ninetales just looks really cool. So at first I started with the body and the mane, and then I added the rough sketch of the tail. Now I start perfecting the line work. I knew the tail would be probably the hardest part about this guy because it's like the majority of the sprite, but all in all it actually turned out to be pretty simple. I adjusted the direction and the curve of the lines quite a lot, but it really didn't take too long on this one. All the colors on it are mostly placeholder right now. Get the ears shading put in, get the hind leg put in, and this is the part where I am doing the highlights on the tail. It might look odd at first. But I'm gonna do a special type of shading on the fur of Ninetales because it won't be so cut and dry. It's gonna be more transitioned like hair might be, like shining. I think it turned out pretty well. I end up adjusting the colors pretty much at the end of every sprite and to get them to look a little bit less extreme, and this turned out really well. Second to last, we have the very unnatural looking Porygon. For Porygon, I tried to go with extremely geometric shapes because that's just how he is. So there were no rounded edges at all on this guy, which kind of made it a tricky sprite to create, but it turned out pretty good. He's only got 2 different colors on him, red and blue, and then just varying lightnesses and darknesses of those colors based on the angle of the character to the light source. So that was pretty easy to color in this case. And I'm going through a few different variations of the tail angle because I just couldn't quite figure out exactly how I wanted it. And we got it. The head is probably the most complex part of him. All in all, pretty simple Pokemon though. Get his eye filled in, get his pupil in there, shade him up. Piece them together, and there you have it. There's Porygon. Do a little bit of recoloring to make them look a little more correct. I think I adjusted them again after the video, yeah. Slightly less saturated in this one, and I think it turned out well. And lastly, we have Scyther, the bug type Pokemon. That concludes our 15 different types. This guy took around an hour and 15, I think. It would have taken a lot longer if I went for a more dramatic pose, but I knew this guy was going to be probably one of the more complex Pokemon I made. So I went with a simple, very symmetrical pose. He turned out very well though. Wings look good, his head looks pretty good. Probably the weakest part of him are his feet, the boots, or whatever you want to call them. Still clearing up the line work here. You can see erasing stuff, adjusting stuff, adding in the details. Now I'm working on his upper leg covers, which are kind of leaf shaped. Boots I think I just made too small, they need to be bigger. But it turned out okay. Working on the shading now. Light source again coming from the top left. Shading in on the wings. I tried to go for like a banding light source on the sword, or the sword arms, but ended up not doing that. And there he is. Let's take another look at the complete collection. Alright, there you have it. We got 9 types in this video and 6 in the last. Thanks for stopping by and checking out Weekly Pixels. Hope to see you next week. Have a great day.